Uh-oh.
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Donna Schneider. I'm the president of the Prince George's County Historical Society. And welcome to our first chat of 2023 and our third year of our chats. So welcome. Tonight's chat is going to be with Chris Haley and John Peter Thompson. And they're going to be talking about the 3 Ps, people, places, and politics in Prince George's County in the lower Chesapeake. This is going to be an animated and sometimes humorous chat, from what I understand. The conversation will explore how you look at history, from who is discussed and their stories, to which places and structures are important to the culmination of which political policies are supported. We will be recording this chat, so please mute your microphones. And we will post the chat on our YouTube channel, which you can access through our society website, www.pghistory.org. The chat will probably go up this coming weekend, so you'll find it then. Both gentlemen are looking forward to your comments and questions and opinions. So please put your questions in the chat box and we will get to as many of them as possible. And who knows, the conversation may veer off into other topics besides people, places, and politics. So gentlemen, it's all yours.
Did you mention donations? Did you mention donations? Sorry. I was just wondering.
She does that at the end because the society is an all-volunteer organization, but she'll bring up the end, and because we have excited people about history,
right,
and people, places, and politics. Chris, it's great to have you join me in this a true chat here.
Yes,
and I think people have seen the little CV, but perhaps we'll start off gently here as you tell us about the Maryland Archives. You do something over there with the Maryland Archives. What is the Maryland Archives and what do you do?
Rumors are a crazy thing. They just spread like wildfire, and Smokey the Bear can't put them out. So I've been at the archives a couple of years now, and my official title is Director of the Study of the Legacy of Slavery in Maryland. And as such, I oversee a department, which right now is a department of one, but it's a part of the larger research division, where specifically we oversee anything that has to do with the legacy of enslavement in Maryland. Our primary focus when we began was antebellum Maryland through Reconstruction years, 1830 to 1880, where we really looked very, very closely at the lives of free and enslaved Blacks and mulattoes through census records, the federal census records, again, 1830, 1840, 1850, 1860, 1870, and 1880, because we wanted to see not only where people lived, with whom they lived, the approximate value that people had accrued if they were free, but also when freedom came in the 1870 and 1880 censuses, were we able to find out if they stayed in the same place, if they had accrued any financial resources or real estate resources, did they remain in the same places, and to what degree did they achieve this? And if so, then we would dig in deeper and create what we call case studies or biographies about these individuals. Additionally, we look into runaway ads and committal notices, because for those in your audience who are familiar with those, and for those in your audience who even aren't familiar with those, I have found those to be probably the most descriptive materials about African Americans of that time, because treated as and regarded as chattel, persons of color who were enslaved and also free, who may have helped people who were enslaved, were very specifically described because they were property, and the persons who wanted their property returned to them were very specific as to any traits, any physical traits the individuals had, and also any psychological tics the person may have had, such as if they talked slowly, when let's say, interrogated for want of another, or when questioned, or if they spoke fast, or if they had a stutter, or if they had any markings on their face, any scars, or any lost bits of fingers or parts of their bodies, anything that would make sure that someone who was literate could read this document and know that this person truly was a freed Black, or they could suspect that they had a forged document, or a document they had obtained from somebody else, because they would not match the description that the document that they held in their hand, what it represented to them. So those are the key elements. And right now we're looking further into being a part of the Maryland Commission for Maryland Lynching for Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We're very much supporting that effort. I'm a commissioner on that, as well as sundry other items that are coming up, such as we're delving a little bit into, as much as possible, trying to figure out if there's any way to find the names of the persons who were involved with the building of the State House, the Maryland State House, and any of the other historic buildings in the Annapolis proper. So it's a lot more than that. Certainly this month has been very busy because it's Black History Month. So I've been using up some mileage getting to this place or that place, or doing a virtual talk here, a virtual talk there, to try to really share the information that we've been able to discover over the last, this department has been in place since 2005, although I've been researching specifically in Maryland about African American history since the task force to create the task force for the commemoration and legacy and heritage of the legacy of slavery in Maryland, which then became the commission, which then became the actual department, which was in 2005. Prior to those years, we had some grants from the National Park Service, Network to Freedom, and also the Department of Education Post-Secondary Education Underground Railroad Project, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, because it gave us 2 very large grants, by which I was able to hire full-time staff for about 10 years, which is a really key to why I've been able to accrue so much information that I've just tried to relay to you in a meandering, I guess, 5 minutes now.
Chris, is this information that you have dug up, uncovered, found super secret and inaccessible except for professional experts?
I will share it all for $5.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is before the archives sort of went down this, I
Sure.
used to explore colonial and we'll call them old newspapers.
Yes.
And for exactly what you said, I learned a lot about the times from the runaway slave ads. And you mentioned specific personal characteristics. The one thing you didn't mention, and what I was learning, was the occupations, the varied occupations of the enslaved people. For instance, if you were a gardener, a horticulturist, you were likely not to be busy in the winter. So what gets paired with gardeners? Cobblers. For reasons that I can't explain. In the gardening season, you're out keeping the grand and not so grand gardens. And I'm thinking in terms of flower gardens and maybe the herbal gardens, the kitchen gardens, not the great agricultural fields. In the wintertime, there's not too much to do, so you're making shoes. And so I would uncover these patterns, and it is from the runaway slave ads, which if I remember from when I can see, the public can access. You reproduce these ads, right?
Yes, it's all from the newspapers. Either the original ones are at the archives, which we've scanned, or we have some of them from Dorchester County specifically. We borrowed from the Dorchester County Historical Society and digitized those, and then of course returned them back to the Dorchester County. And we have have linkages to them from our Legacy of Slavery database. When you click on it, you will get to the actual PDF of those images. So yeah, they are, and I think we have roughly 12 to 14,000 of them available online, probably for all the counties in existence at the time when slavery ended. But we didn't receive money to go, let's say, exhaustively into each county. So we've only exhaustively gone into 14 of the 24 jurisdictions of Maryland. But still, as I said, there's a lot there that can be mined and I think understood, or at least revealed within all those ads.
Right. So the ads are a major source as I independently started getting into slavery. That doesn't sound right.
That sounds really bad.
Yes. As I began to investigate
Right.
enslavement, let me let me
Right.
rephrase that.
Yeah.
So, well, you've brought up slavery, and this to me is I call it the other side of the story. Prince George's County did a reasonably good job, sort of telling part of the story. Then it created a myth out of the European version of the story, but there was always this missing piece, which is what got me interested in, well, as a historic preservation commissioner, when I first came on, there's a big 7,000 square foot, beautiful home outside of Upper Marlboro. And the developers kept trying to hide the fact of who might have built the house. And at some point, their version of the story is, well, the widow built the house. And I can remember telling the developers, let me see if I've got this straight. It's the early 19th century, so she picked up the phone and she got Sears Roebuck to come out and build the house. Who are you kidding? That there was this missing part of the story, the craftsmen, the artisans, and the enslaved people that worked on this property and made it possible to build a 7,000 square foot home.
Right.
And then I'm faced with the developer not wanting to tell that part of the story because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to sell their new homes built around it. And I'm thinking to myself, and I think I said, well, I'm not the Wealth Preservation Commissioner, so that's not my problem, but exactly to whom are you selling these houses? This is Prince George's County, early 2000s, and there's just silence in the room. Nobody wants to touch the other side of, or wanted to touch the other side of the story. How do you deal with, and I'll talk about oral history. Does the archives record oral history?
We have recorded oral history. Actually, we were doing it very specifically. It might be 20 years ago when North Brentwood was looking at creating a museum, African American History Museum, which has been created now. I think it's called the Prince George's County Museum at North Brentwood. And then at the same time, Brentwood itself was pursuing its own genealogy or its own community history. Within that time, I was going to some of the community meetings to document, take photographs, and just share in some of the meetings where community members would talk about their history. Some of the older members there would talk about what they remembered from, say, the early 20th century, or 40s, 50s, 60s, having lived in that community. And so they were sharing and taping and recording some of their conversations, which we then did record some in the archives, although it ended kind of shortly, maybe after a few months. So I don't really know where they are right now, unfortunately, but we did endeavor specifically for them with that branch of I guess exploration.
Yeah, the problem or the challenge, I think is the better word, as a preservation commissioner, when we're telling the European side of the story, there are structures. So there's something physical which you can then weave whatever information you have around. You can visit the site and it's visible and touchable, tangible. With the other side of the story, the people that built the house, their homes, their living quarters are not extant for the most part, or at the very least, we can use archaeology. But that means that oral history becomes an important resource. And I think this is an area that I hope we do more digging, though it's kind of hard to go back beyond 1930 at this point. The longer we wait, the less stories we get.
Right. I'm always fascinated, even with those persons who are archaeologists, and even with the recent discovery of the area where Ben Ross is believed to have had his home, how much archaeologists do find. I mean, it seems like every time there's a archaeological dig, buttons are found, toy dolls or remnants of toys from children are found. There's plates or parts of cups, porcelain is found, jewelry is found. And I just think that, where did people drop these that they ended up deep in the ground underneath what at some point was a floor or was some type of a surface, or if it's just somehow lost outside in the house and no one thought to bring it back in or what have you. But to this day, that always happens. And that always fascinates me. And then, of course, very skilled archaeologists can then go back and do an approximate, I guess one would call it, aging of those materials to see what time period they actually originated. And that always fascinates me. And so I'm thinking, even today, when I go outside or in my house, am I dropping something that 50 years from now, somebody will find this or that or whatever, and wonder who was there in 2023 and he dropped a comb, or he dropped a cuffling or something like that, because you don't think of that when you're going through life. And I think, as you say, the other part of the story is those persons who were enslaved, or those persons who were free, those persons who were working on these buildings, on these structures, or working either as domestics or as field laborers. Were they actually just losing these items, or somewhere in their soul, in their mind, in their, I don't know, in some deep recesses of spirituality, were they thinking, I'm just going to drop this, I'm just going to lay this piece of my life down here, and it's going to be a legacy. Someone will find this years from now.
Or were some things, especially with a historic structure, and I have a vague memory of a plantation home that was demolished, and under the window, the wall above which was a window and door jambs, were exactly a coin, a little something like things put in a little satchel and buried under the door frame, or in the foundation above which was a window. In other words, intentional.
Oh, wow.
I don't want to speculate on what's going on here, but I think I distinctly remember one home, which is under a parking lot now. The archaeologists, as they went over the foundation of where the home was, they found these deposits, and they almost certainly were intentional, right? The people who built the house were not the white plantation owner,
right? Mm-hmm.
And so under the door, the threshold, is a coin and a button and a something. That's not accidental.
Right. So
Now,
I think that's
why
fascinating.
they're there, the archaeologists probably have a narration that I don't remember, and I don't want to speculate. But I think that a lot of this is intentional. And then, of course, there's the archaeologists who I think they live to find the so-called midden.
Right.
Yes, because that's where you find all kinds of goodies
Mhm.
that help describe the past. My question to you, while we're talking about the archaeological profession and everything, how do we go about, I don't, retelling the story, but enhancing the story of Prince George's County, the lower Chesapeake? For 300 years, the pendulum's sort of been off to one side. I like to say half the story.
Yeah.
There's the other half that we're beginning, the white side are beginning to recognize is there. How do we weave the two stories together?
Mhm. I think what the mindset, I don't want to say should do, but I think what would help is just if we think in terms of a larger story. If you think in terms of today, and I always feel like whenever I talk about history, whenever I talk about any subject that has a basis in years and years ago, I always try to relate it to now, whether it's in slavery, whether it's genealogy in general, whether it's wars, whether it's politicians, whatever. I always try to relate it to now because we're still talking about people ultimately. We could be talking about dogs and cats or whatever, but generally speaking, we're talking about people. And as people, we pretty much have the same core desires to love, to be loved, to eat, to drink, to survive, to take care of our families, to a curiosity about life, a curiosity about the beyond, and a nosiness about what's going on somewhere else that we don't know about personally. And so because of that, I think we can always relate to what people might have thought decades ago, centuries ago, because they were still people. They were just people in different circumstances. So if we talk about bringing the stories together, let's say into the 19th century when slavery was still at legalized and it was at hand, and also the years post enslavement when Reconstruction was a dream of what could be, then we think about how do we describe ourselves today? How do we look at our lives today? How do we look at what's going on today? And generally speaking, we always talk in terms of first our families, then our communities. And I say communities, it's to some degree, it's our neighborhood. If you hear a fire engine outside of your house, chances are you're going to go to your window or go to your door and try to see who is that? Is that one of our neighbors? Or if you hear a police department or a police car, you're going to do the same thing. So then it's a community. And then when your schools takes you a little bit further, where's your child going to school? What's going on after school? What are the teachers like? Is there a job? Is there a fair going on? And then you meet some of the other parents. So it just gradually goes out from there. And then you start seeing other people, especially in Prince George's County, at least in most places, who are of different nationalities, Black and white, Asian, Jewish, gay, straight. You see all sorts of different type of people, and that expands your horizon of now. So if we're trying to be more knowledgeable about the past, we should look at it in that same way. Yes, I want to know about the first African-American church that was built in Upper Marlboro. However, how was it affected by a white church that was of the same faith that might be a few yards away or a few miles away? Were there issues? Was there confrontation? Was there cooperation? It's just a matter of opening ourselves up to the broader story, just like we hopefully open ourselves up to our current broader story, because it's just more interesting that way. It's just, it gives life more variety if we look at it in that way. So it's just opening ourselves up to what happened then to other people, which affected the whole community of Prince George's County, and eventually brings us to where we are today. Even to me, some of the things I think are really should be important, but are so often overlooked, is where do streets get their names? Why is a street named anything? I mean, I live on Bright Seat Road in Upper Marlboro, well, in Landover, Maryland, near the J.T. Pullman School, very near the FedEx Field. I don't know why it's called Bright Seat Road. I mean, maybe the sun came out and the person who was there, wow, he fell down and said, my God, this is hurt. Ooh, sure is bright out, because he hurt his seat. You know, I don't know, but I think
At
that's
at least it's a road with an interesting name. You could live on 41st Place.
right, right. See, and even for that, what that means to me, what that question to me is that who decided what was First Street? Now I know there's Rhode Island Avenue, and I know that people could say that's Route 1, but then who decided what First Street was? Who decided then to make a street an alphabet? And then see, those are decisions that, now maybe that's going into the weeds, so to speak, but I think that is a curiosity, which if you just overlook it, you overlook it, and you leave it overlooked for the rest of your lives. But I think if you start telling your children about that and put that in their minds, then maybe you'll go crazy, because they'll say why to everything, but still, it builds and it instills a curiosity in a child at a young age that I think would help us, those of us who are interested in our own family histories or in genealogy or in history, to validate and to validate, I guess validate is the best word, going back and regarding history in a more cherished fashion than it seems at times, when it's just like, well, you know, that was so long ago, let's bulldoze it down. Let's just put something else in this place. Take a picture if you want, but otherwise we're moving on.
Let's, I was going to talk about road names, which has nothing to do with the topic. I grew up on Baltimore-Washington Boulevard, which was the name of the road if you were heading north. If you were heading south, it was Washington-Baltimore Boulevard.
Oh, how about that?
Because the road, I don't know who gave it a name, but it told you the endpoints of the road, Lanham-Severn Road.
Okay.
Right? And then somebody came along and started giving roads numbers, and nobody has any idea where they are now. I wanted, you mentioned that you are sitting on, and let me get this title right, the lynching.
It's MLTRC, Maryland Lynching Commission for Truth and Reconciliation. I probably got it wrong myself.
All right, well, you know, before we start, I don't want to add some extra adjectives to this.
Right,
Can you talk a little bit about the work of the commission and what we're doing here in Prince George's County?
Well, the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed by the Maryland state legislation in 2019. And then we started having our first meetings after the commissioners were chosen in 2020, barely before the pandemic happened. So we did have a few meetings in person, and then it just became obviously the pandemic world when everything was done in virtually. Generally speaking, what the commission is about is to study and to, I guess one would say, recognize and acknowledge the instances of racial terror that occurred in Prince George's County, not just only to acknowledge that this was a wrong that was done, but in hopes to explore why these acts occurred. And if one can explore why these acts occurred, perhaps we can explore and examine how one can learn from these acts so that nothing like it happens again, and that we can see and recognize when violence against people of a different race is perpetuated, and fight against it going on, or stop it before it gets to the point where people were judged guilty before due process.
Well, that's right, extrajudicial.
Right,
extradition.
right,
Yeah.
and then be able to move forward with that. So that's why reconciliation, of course, there's talks about reconcile. How can you reconcile to something you haven't, quote unquote, siled? You can't reconcile because it was never already okay, so to speak. But that's part of what the commission is doing in the statewide scope, and the Prince George's County Memorial Lynching Project is exploring the same facets for the 4 individuals who were lynched in Prince George's County. And
let me, and because I have sort of tuned into the work, so some of these are leading questions that I think I know the answer, but I think our audience will benefit from this. There's something called the Bladensburg dueling ground. So we know where the white folks shot each other extrajudiciously. Judicious, I don't even know if that's the right word. So
it's something like
we
that.
can at least put a sign up and say, here is where violence happened to settle issues outside the law. It's nothing much to look at, it's just a field. How do we go about preserving sites? How do we even find the sites for a lynching?
Right. Well, it's very complicated, and I don't know if one can ever truly, or let's say not truly, if one can ever exactly identify the site where a person was, let's say, met their death at a lynching. And part of that is not even to say, where, let's say, from a stereotypical point of view, lynching is always a hanging. Well, that's not true. Lynchings could be anything that led
it's any execution outside the court.
Right, right.
Extra legal, outside the law.
Right, because certainly we have found in the many different, I think it's approximately 38 to 40 individuals that we have found statewide. Some were hanged, but many were hanged and shot and mutilated, and many facets or many degradations were done to their bodies post-death and after death. So where they finally perhaps expired, or where their body was laid to, I mean, won't say laid to rest, but laid to left alone after the deed had been done, is probably what we would consider the lynching spot. So it certainly is going to the newspapers and trying to get a sense from the newspapers where the final act was perpetuated, and then within that, it's just, again.
Well, I'll help you out here.
Yeah.
So as you said, which one of us is doing the interview here? So we're not going to find the tree.
Right.
We can get within the area and within a certain amount of certainty within a large area, which isn't that large. The question I have is this the kind of thing that we would put a marker up to? You know, one of those old, remember the cast iron roadside historic markers? Maybe you don't remember. They used to be along US 1. Here is where the first telegraph line was. And I was 7 years old and thought, wow, it was right there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say it could be done. But I don't know if it could be. I think that's really open to whichever organization has taken that mantle, has taken that burden to bear to decide what they feel is best reflective of remembering where such an act occurred. I think sometimes a marker that denotes a field where it happened would be sufficient, because there's also the reality that within a lynching, as much as we focus on the spot and where we do what's, as you know, a soil collection of where we believe the person again may have fallen ultimately, and then send those jars of soil to the National Lynching Museum. I feel like the field in and of itself does denote where that terror was perpetuated, because many times the person was not just, I guess, carefully driven to a spot. Many times they were dragged through town or dragged through a field, or so that the lynching was inclusive of the whole act of them dying, almost in a terrible, I guess, anachronism. But when we talk about Jesus having the cross and walking all the miles before he finally is the cross of Mount Calvary, people who were lynched were often captured, and then while they were being taken to whichever spot they were hanged or shot or mutilated, they would be abused or hit or beat, or rocks were thrown at them along that pathway. So I think within that, if there's an area where we think the person was.
Right. No, I think you've answered my question, and I have a follow-up here. Mm-hmm. So lynching is part of the time which is commonly referred to or becomes Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. And in Prince George's County, that results in segregation and Black communities. And we have a few of these communities, and I'm thinking of Lakeland, mm-hmm. Before the University of Maryland paves it all over.
Right.
And I'm thinking of historic preservation. We have devices under historic preservation to have historic sites, to remember the past. Are these segregated communities, and I think Lakeland's interested in exploring becoming a historic district in Prince George's County. I mean, they've just initiated investigation of this. Is this something that we should be doing, preserving what do I want to call it, the remnants of Jim Crow?
I think that it is very valid to do that, not because of, quite frankly, not even because of the negativity of it, but because of the positivity of what it actually provided for African-American communities often. Because some of those communities, while segregated, thrived within themselves. They thrived because I'm not an economist, but I know that it's been said that it's a good sign of an economy when the dollar travels within that economy a certain number of times, like 7 or 8 or whatever time. That's really good, because that dollar is being utilized and regenerated or whatever within a community. So it's really doing well. Within segregated communities, several times, I was going to say many, I just know that there's some examples of some where Black barbers, Black funeral directors, Black teachers, Black doctors did very, very, very well for themselves within that segregated community. Black store owners did very well within those segregated communities. Black restaurateurs or shop owners did very well within those segregated communities. And then when integration happened, it gradually, for want of a better word, hate their ability to thrive and survive because there was more competition and also more opportunities, and people would start looking elsewhere. And when they started looking for elsewhere, then the possibility of other options took people away, and it took them out of the communities. So I think because of that, you do want to honor where these communities existed, probably of their own accord, of necessity, to become a financially, spiritually, socially vibrant, vital community, predominantly African American, until segregation was finally eradicated and gradually the community was no more. So I think in and of itself, that's a reason why we should try to preserve those communities.
One of the issues that as a county preservation commissioner, I'm struggling is not the right word, contending with, is the standards for preserving a structure were originally set up to preserve Mount Vernon, or in our case, Riversdale.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How do you apply the standards to the White House, the Capitol, Mount Vernon, Riversdale, to these communities? It becomes an interesting challenge. I know we can get past this, but it's currently, do we hold what is now a suburban community to the standards that we hold the repair work to the White House to, under preservation rules and laws? It becomes an interesting dilemma, and we will solve this problem.
Right. Right. I feel like it's so, I think part of what is worth considering is that, excuse me, and I said this at some talk the other day, I don't remember what it was, but it's outside of being royalty, and not royalty because you're Beyonce, but royalty because you're literally the king and queen, and then your children are the prince and princesses, whatever. Most people have started out being Joe Blow, so to speak. And they have a mother, they have a father, they have a sister, they have a brother, they have a grandma, a grandpa, and they go to school, blah, 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 blah. And then at some point in their life, they do something which is so prominent and so widely documented that they become famous. And they're not just famous, they become almost iconic. And then whatever they touched is historic. Where they were born is historic. Where they went to school is historic. Where they first got their, I don't know, their job that maybe led them to being a famous whatever they became is historic. And then you go back and think, oh gosh, what was it? Because it wasn't a mansion, it wasn't it wasn't a throne, it wasn't a palace. So how do we look at the log cabin where Abraham Lincoln was born? Does that thing still exist? Oh my God, how could we not have saved that? Oh my God. Well, because he wasn't Abraham Lincoln when he was born. He was just some little boy and he was out in the field. And so that does become the type of situation where, in retrospect, preservation communities such as what we have in Prince George's County and everywhere, I feel should be cognizant of the properties that surround you, because not that every property is going to have a link to a someone who's turned the world around, but there is that possibility. So I think unless a structure is absolutely gone to the crapper, I think there should be a consideration which supports the existence of preservation communities and commissions to keep doing what they do and to try to find those, I guess, proximities to power that can allow for them to look at a structure that they think might have been the home of an enslaved person in 1850 in Upper Marlboro, or of a free Black population that settled in Freetown, or in Lakeland, or in Brentwood, or in North Brentwood, because these modest homes, modest structures were the places where prominent origins were nurtured, and were from which they sprung. Yeah, I think it's sprung, not sprang. Right. So I think
Spring, sprang, sprung.
sprang, right?
Yeah.
Would have
Okay,
been.
so what did we decide, sprang or sprung?
Right. Spring is coming soon. I know about that
Yeah,
groundhog.
okay,
So I
Right.
just want to say, you've got a couple more minutes and then I'm going to go to questions.
They're gonna cut us off. Okay, fine. Be that way.
all right, well, we have a couple more minutes. Do you have a question?
Me?
No,
I was
not,
gonna say, if you wanted to
Chris,
discuss
Chris.
one more point before I go to questions.
I forgot what my point was, so I decided it was Chris's turn to ask me a
To
question.
ask you a question. Well, I would say a question for you and Preservation Commission, and also for those who are probably on this call and on these chats, is what have you found to be the most challenging aspect of your position? And I'm guessing it's not just being able to give money to any organization, but let's say outside of that, what's the most challenging and what's the most satisfying?
So the most challenging thing is the stakeholder community for history writ large is negligible. That means when we run to the politicians and say, woe is us, we need help preserving, educating, there's a blank stare because there's only two other people. There's no unified stakeholder group. Now, that's not to say there aren't a multitude. And I think the Historical Society about 10 years ago compiled a list of over 60 local small groups, all doing something vaguely related to history, culture, or heritage. And some of these groups are very large. The African American Historical and Cultural, help me, Donna.
Genealogical Society.
Yes, I mean, some of them are very large and are doing big things, but some of them are very small and floundering and trying to unify all of the stakeholders into one sort of super, so that more than 3 people show up for a county council hearing.
Right.
That's 3 on a good day. That's the big challenge from Preservation Commission to the society. And I'm going out on a limb here and speaking for these tens of, dozens of small local groups that are interested. We are fractured and parochial and disorganized. In some sense, this reflects the state of, I'm going to be a little political here, of education, which doesn't include history. So there's a great gap in what I consider basic historic knowledge across the population of Prince George's County. And part of that is because we have being a suburban county to Washington, D.C., there's a lot of turnover. Right. Very few people are from Prince George's County for 10 generations.
Right. So
that's, to me, the challenge. The other side of the question was something positive.
Right. Well, what has been the most satisfying? And nothing.
Well,
okay.
that's a trick question. Well, for me, so I'm going to answer personally. For me, it is every day that I learn something new from somebody who is burrowing away into the history of the county, whether it's structural, archaeological, or oral. I look forward to learning something new every day. And the amount that I have learned about Prince George's County as much as I've learned, the amount that I don't know remains the same. There's just so much to learn
Sure.
that it's endless. And so I find that that keeps me excited about pursuing the history of the county.
Mhm. I like that. I like that. That's good. That's good.
Okay, Donna.
Okay, so the first question, and I'm sorry, my screen print is very small, so it's hard to read tonight. Kurt Walter.
Eyes look lovely.
So if I look really close to the camera, I'm sorry. He's asking, is there a dig going on at the enslaved burial site at Sacred Heart Church in Bowie? Do either of you know? Or I know I saw Jennifer Stabler online earlier. She wants to unmute and comment if she knows.
Yeah, there certainly was. I was talking to Kevin Porter just the other day. And so I don't know if it's done, but it's my guess is that digs don't exactly stop. Once they begin, it's because of a reason, because of what's there. And then you keep moving because it's hard to, I think, decide that, oh, I'm done. There's nothing more I can find. So it certainly has begun, and to my knowledge, I have not heard that it's ended, especially because there was, I think, a significant enough of a find that would warrant continued study there.
Is Dr. Stabler still on? Donna?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I was actually out at Sacred Heart last week, and I think what happened is I think some of the African American parishioners were complaining about the African American portion of the cemetery being overgrown, and so they hired some people to go out there and start clearing the brush from those areas, and they started finding stones, and some of the stones got transported to other places within the site. And they eventually called Dr. Laura Mazur, who works at Catholic University. And she came out, they had, I guess on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, they had like a cleanup day, and people from the community came and they helped to clear some of the brush and things like that. So now you've got a couple of hills there that are exposed, and a lot of the brush has been cleared away. And now my concern is that the soil is going to start washing away. They did find quite a few. I think they kind of estimated about 200 burials in those brushy areas. And we believe that they are some of the people who were formerly enslaved on the plantation, and possibly some of the family members, who were buried there after slavery into the 20th century. They're just trying to, I think, get their heads around it. But we do have, as John Peter knows, and Donna, we do have grants that are available for the church to hire somebody to go out and try to map these burials in. It's going to be a big project because there are a lot there. So that's sort of a short update on what's going on there.
For everybody in the audience, that was and is Dr. Stabler, who is the county archaeologist, and my go-to morning early phone call for information that I have forgotten or don't know. So archaeological questions. Jennifer, I'm sorry, we're not interviewing you, but am I right to remember that we found at Salubria under the thresholds coins and buttons and things?
Let's see, at Salubria.
I'm sure y'all did, the archaeologists. There was like a coin and a button and a little figure and things under the threshold to the door and under the windows, but in the foundation.
Well,
that's all right. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. You'll look it up in the morning.
I will look it up
whether I'm right or wrong.
Yes,
Something that
I'll
you
look
can-
it up. I don't want to say for sure because I don't remember that exactly, but I will look it up.
All right.
All right, next question is from Hilda, I believe. Have you found ideas or objects that show slaves longing for their African towns and landscapes?
I mean, in London town, several years ago, there was a dig beneath one of the foundations, one of the structures there. And it's believed that what was found, and also in Annapolis too, that there were a satchel, which included what's believed to have been some magical, spiritual remnants or relics from West Africa, I believe. So that's what I'm aware of in two different digs that happened in Maryland. So probably if you looked online, London town African-American digs, and I think it.
All right, well, we're not between the two of us very helpful. I think when Jennifer looks up and Dr. Stabler looks back at Salubria, I believe it's the same thing, though I don't think these were relics from West Africa, but they are a coin and a button, and perhaps there was some cultural symbolism and maybe they were in a satchel. The satchel wasn't found. It's just the placement of these little items, these artifacts couldn't have been accidental. So there's something going on.
Right.
So she asked another question saying, do you find more objects related to women or to men?
Wow, it's a Dr. Stabler hour. Did we lose you, Jennifer?
Oh, are you talking about in excavations on African-American sites or?
Did not, just said women, related to women or to men slaves, male slaves. Do you
We'll
find
go
more?
with archaeology.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know that a lot of objects you can really attribute to like a certain person. You know, you find lots of artifacts, but attributing those artifacts to just one person is a bit difficult.
They're not gender specific.
But sometimes
What you
there's
find
pipes are found, but then again, we can't think that women didn't.
But I think women could smoke a pipe also.
Right. So we can't just think that.
All right, Kurt Walter has another question. Has anybody ever gone to jail for committing a lynching in Prince George's County?
Of what we've looked at so far, I have not found that anyone's been charged, actually, even with the ones that, not the ones that within within the mandated years of the commission, which is 1854 to 1933. And those
in Prince George's. Yeah, I think there are 4 African Americans and one white man who was lynched, and even he, the white lynching, his family made the mistake of burning down the state's attorney's barn and the chief judge's stable or something. So there was no way that his assailants were going to be charged. And given the state of things, the 4 African-American or Black American lynchings, there were no charges.
Right.
There was no attempt to charge. And my speculation again is everybody in charge actually knew who did the lynching.
Okay.
So it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Okay, so next question is from Oscar Gregory. He says, I understand that the memorial site in Fredericksburg where slaves were traded was adversely reacted to because it was said to glorify the slave trade. Would recognizing lynching sites have the same reaction?
I think to some people it will, but to some people the people that are of this effort are about acknowledging that it happened and acknowledging those persons who were murdered in this fashion. So certainly they are not thinking in any way about it glorifying whatever that lynchings occurred or what have you. It's to acknowledge that lynchings occurred so that people know to be aware of what occurred and respectful of these persons who didn't have respect or dignity when they died. So, but now that said, of course, anyone out there, people are upset at the fact that we bring this up. People are upset that there's a lynching commission. People are upset that there's the Prince George's County Memorial Lynching Project, because there's this feeling that if you don't talk about it, it'll go away, and then we can just forget about it, and then people won't be upset about it. But I think I just think that's not.
Well, and I have run into this in my 20 years as a commissioner, not directly, but indirectly, when we find what we believe may have been the remains of, or perhaps the dwelling place that became a tenant or sharecropper house that might have been a slave house. And the question comes up, well, why would we want to preserve that? You know, we're building these $500,000 homes and everything, and we don't want to be reminded of Jim Crow and the time of segregation, let alone the time of slavery. I can't say that it's an overwhelming thing over the last 20 years, but I have run into, why would we want to remember the horrors of slavery? Anything that had to do with slavery, we don't want to remember that. But this is an exception, in my opinion.
I think
but it is out there.
Right. It'd be just how some people don't want us to talk about the Holocaust. They don't want that to be brought up anymore. Right. And so then why do we bring up Pearl Harbor? That was an awful event that happened. So should we not bring that up? Should we not bring up the Japanese internments? No, we shouldn't bring that up. There's so many things that were horrible. The Boston Massacre, that was a part of what led into the American Revolution. Well, we don't want to bring that up because there's so many things that were not great, but they are memorialized and they are historically. The Alamo.
Yes, the Alamo. We don't want to talk about Fort Necessity and a young American hero who started a world war by shooting the French ambassador. We don't want to learn about that.
No.
Mm-mm. Okay. Kurt Walter has another question. Isn't the Black church still a vehicle for upward mobility for African Americans? Whitney Houston, John Legend, and others got their start in the church.
I think it certainly can be. It certainly is a place where communities, white and Black, and Jewish and what have you, where people can go for fellowship, or people can go to believe that they are in a safe space to talk about people who at least have one, or at least people who ascribe to have one similar belief that they can share with for an hour or so. So I think so in and of itself, it could happen in a church. I myself, there's a lot of people who, it just seems like a lot with the Black history, people who become really, really famous as singers, often it goes back to, and they were at a church at some point, and that's Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye, the people you just mentioned, it's Sylvester. I mean, there's so many different people, and that has been part of their root. But I think if you really look deep, you'll probably find many who didn't as well. It's just that I guess maybe that part of the story isn't told as much.
Okay. And this is the last question, also from Oscar Gregory. The Beltsville community would love to resurrect the Ebenezer Church Cemetery, or I should say just comment.
That's a comment, or
I guess yes, it's a comment. Didn't realize that until I read it. Sorry. So.
I mean, there's a
Yes,
lot
well-
of different efforts going on about cemeteries nationally and even locally. And I unabashed plug, my movie Unmarked is about cemeteries, about unmarked graves of Black and free and enslaved African Americans. So it certainly is, and as we mentioned Sacred Heart earlier, it certainly is something that is very much in the, I guess, the popular view and the popular mindset right now to be respectful and to be aware of that. And all I would say is we should remember that so doing that means for ourselves too, take it back to ourselves. So are we going to our parents' grave sites? Are we going to the sites where people that we know and love have passed away? Are we taking care of those sites? Because to some degree, I mean, it's kind of cliche, start with yourself and move forward from that, or at least where your relatives are buried, is that cemetery being taken care of? Because I think that would be something, if people would fight against it or think, oh, why are you spending all this money on this site or that site, the people are gone, then you could say, well, I'm doing it for my own family too. I'm doing it for my own. And so that's
I'm sorry, phone call came in.
Oh, and that's why I can do it for someone else, or I feel empowered to do it for someone else as well.
Yeah. Well, I must have come right at the end of where Donna says, okay, that's it. We're all going home now.
Yeah, right.
I was going to say basically that. So I just wanted to thank Chris and John Peter for a fascinating chat as always. And to thank everybody for joining us. Our next history chat is next month on March 27th. It's always going to be the fourth Monday at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Both John Peter and I have been blanking on who our next guest is, so we apologize, but there'll be a notice that goes out with the details of our next chat in a couple of weeks. And as John Peter alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, we are a all-volunteer organization. So if you would like to donate and help keep these history chats free for everybody's enjoyment, that'd be great. And you can do so through our website, www.pghistory.org. So again, thank you, Chris and John Peter, and good night, everybody.
Thank you guys for having me. Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thank you, John Peter. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.